Hello everyone, my name is Ross the Alcheminiaturist, and this is another turnip video. Back along, I made a couple of videos on Turnip28, a chaff video, and a video for my version of the Procession of Woe, the Heartstopper cart. Well, I'm back at it again with another unit, this time Brutes. Brutes are, as the core rulebook says, especially dedicated to the cause and completely addicted to the strange powers of the roots. Brutes are relatively well-fed and often heavily armored. Okay, so what do we have? Addicted to root powers, well-fed, and heavily armored. While thinking about these guys at work, I'd come up with a couple of different options. One, I could try to make them from Neapolitanic models and somehow make them look more fed and more armored. I could take the Putrid Blight Kings and make them less Nurgle, but I feel like that is almost too much work, you know? 3, I could print out some Armored Knights from a file, make them more Neapolitanic, and possibly with a head swap or something equally as straightforward, or 4, kitbash them out of a bunch of different bits that I already had and print out something both funny and suitable to show their armor and fedness. I went with option 4. Months ago, I bought the Warrior starter set for Age of Sigmar for 2 reasons, the Lord Arcanum and the core rulebook. I've since lost the core rulebook and the Lord Arcanum is still on sprue, but I have used a bunch of the Cruel Boys in my other Turnip28 video, and that's when I figured I might as well keep using this same kit for them all. I printed 11 barrels, because 1 barrel failed, and since I only needed 6 for a unit, I gave the other 5 to my buddy Jake, who plays Imperial Guard and Cities of Sigmar, and was very excited to receive them. Because these Barrel Brute Boys, with a Z by the way, don't need much more armor than the barrel, I decided that I just needed to separate all of the Stormcast legs and one final set of Cruel Boys legs to be able to make them walk. The problem with these parts that I wanted to use is that they all had a torso, and torsos are not what I need for this. So I had to cut them off just above the quads and make sure that as much of the torsos as possible are gone, but to also make sure that the legs had a little more surface area to be able to help them to stick on the barrels. It was tricky and a fine process, but in the end it seemed to have worked out. I have no true idea how Games Workshop chooses how these models are cut, because, and let's be honest here, some of these model separations are absolutely insane. Like, as you can see, I'm trying to glue the right leg part of one of the Stormcast Vindicators to the rest of its body, and the glue line is so frickin' weird and awkward that I actually had to cut out my losing my mind for a minute. Next, I needed, for these models, heads, arms, both the left and the right, as well as backpacks that I chose, but I ended up not using because my logic was, who in their right mind would throw a backpack on if you had a barrel on as well? I still haven't picked up better superglue since I posted a resupply reel on Instagram, and a good friend of mine, A1 Modern Synthesist, recommended me to go to and get larger glues from my favorite local game store. But this is like the second last container I have, so I'll be going there soon. Also, pause the video there and get a great tip from him for storing said glue. Prepare your butt, FLGS, I'm coming for a resupply. While gluing their legs to the barrels, I'll be honest, the superglue didn't want to stick. I then remembered some of the comments on my How Many Chaos Space Marines video about if you use baking soda and superglue, it works wonders. Shoutouts to this comment right here by a one Ricky Spanish 6596 who said 7 months ago, quote, "If you toss baking soda on superglue, it cures immediately," end quote. So I hobbled upstairs, grabbed my wife's baking soda, sorry honey, and started to use it, And goddamn does it work nice and effectively. The added effect that the baking soda gives is some extra crunchiness to the overall silhouette of the models, due to some of it solidifying on the model. I used more baking soda than needed and tapped the excess off because I figured it would be better and easier to do it that way than to try to slowly and carefully place little bits on it at a time. Gluing the models to the bases was done in the same way as the legs to the barrels. Baking soda, super glue, press, done. I know these bases have holes in them, and I normally would put putty in and on these holes to fill them in, but I'll get back to them later. Using the baking soda also does add a little bit of extra texture to the bases being there, and it solidifying. Next comes the arms and heads. Now I didn't show it, but these 3D printed heads had little round nubs to stick on the bodies that they were originally sculpted for, and I didn't particularly want them to have more neck, so I chopped them all off and forgot to record it. All of these heads and arms that are made of resin are part of the Turnip28 Forlorn Hope Kickstarter that's now available on my mini factory. For painting, I did the exact same steps for each and every one of these brutes. Firstly, I primed with AK's white primer like I do with every model I paint. Now, you have to make sure that you do also focus the tufts on these. We want them to be primed as well. By adding primer and then painting them, they will harden up and look less living and more sickly, wilted, and dead. The name of the game is gross. Well, it's Turnip28, but Turnip28 is gross, so I guess it's the middle name? For the base coat, I used Vallejo's Beastly Brown, mostly because the barrel is the largest part of the model, so it just made sense, you know? I tried to not get too carried away with overspray, but hey, you can only not overspray so much with an airbrush you refuse to change the needle with. As with everything, I try to incorporate a one and done base coating session. I then used Citadel Paint's Leadbelcher for the metal legs, helmets, gun barrels, as well as the bands of the actual barrels, as these are all of the metal parts that the brutes seem to have. And what else color was I going to paint them? Yellow? That's just crazy. Crazy? I was crazy once. Up came ProAcryl's Bright Red for the leader's hat and clothing, along with the painted on hearts to show that they're part of the Heartstopper procession. I love when an army and the units within the army all have a set theme and color palette. There's something about being overly all orderly, even in a wasteland like this, that just seems right. The other 5 brutes all got their clothes painted with ProAcryl's Sky Blue. Rakarth's flesh by Citadel Color was used for the, well, flesh, as flesh needs a flesh tone to be fleshy. Have I said flesh enough yet? Moot Green by Citadel was for the little bits of fungus the brutes seem to have on them, and just to add that little bit more of a pop of color to them. A small amount of ProAcryl's Coal Black was for the base rim, as you have to make sure that the rim is nice and sleek, or the model just doesn't look finished yet, in my opinion. Then came my most favorite part of this, griming them to the 9 hells, which is a cooler way of saying slather the ever-living shit out of them with AK's streaking grime and pray for the best. I spared no amount of streaking grime, save for maybe dipping them into the pot to get these brutes as grimed up as possible and to really add to the feeling that they've probably never had a shower that wasn't from rain, and even then, they probably rolled around in mud afterwards because they were too clean. I know that streaking grime is a hot commodity in my community here in this city, as my favorite local game store almost can't keep it in stock, it seems. I made sure to add even more grime to the tufts for these brutes, to make sure that the gross plants were well and truly gross, and would have a better time sticking upright and looking more dead than before. Now before someone comes for me and says, "But Ross, why are you using the mineral spirits on them? Won't that take some of the grime off?" To that I say, yes it does. But the only parts that I'm wanting to take some away from is where the heart was painted on and a couple of raised edges, so they stand out just a little bit more. As promised, here is exactly why I didn't mind that these bases had holes in them. I love these diorama effect pastes. They do so much heavy lifting for the bases that you want done, but don't want to have to do grass or just a black base. Of course you can upgrade your bases, and I have an ever-growing list of YouTube shorts about building better bases if you want to check those out. But these still need to convey the dirt and the mud and the lack of showers that Turnip28 has, so we need those bases muddy. And there it is, my brutes. Thank you so much for watching. As always, keep your brushes wet and your models painted, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.